Hello everyone. If it's your first time to the channel, welcome, and if it's not, welcome back. I really appreciate all of the support lately. If you enjoy the content, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel, as they really help out. For today's video, we're going to be playtesting with Whitebeard, which many consider the best deck of the format. Whitebeard can be ran in 3 different variations, those being the Moby Dick version, those being a Strawbeard version, and those being like a hybrid version where you kind of mix the two together. For this video, we're going to be playtesting with the Strawbeard version. So let's get into the deck list. So we run 4 Otama, which is very versatile, can minus 2k different characters. It's also a 2k counter. We're running 3 of the Makino, which is a 2k counter, and you can use it to bump up your Nami by 3k, so you can swing at most leaders. We're running 4 of the Sanji, which is also a 2k counter, but you can take 1 life, and it bumps it up to, you give it 2 Rested Dawn, and it can bump it up to 7, which makes it a pretty strong attacker. We're running 3 of the Vista, which is really good in the Zoro matchup, in the Law matchup. It's not the best in the mirror, as other Whitebeards don't run a lot of, weak characters. We're running 1 of the promo Luffy in this version. It's a 2k counter. If you put 2 Dawn under it, it bumps it up to 7 as well. If you have more of the promo Luffys, you can change some of the ratios. At the time I only had 1 promo Luffy, and so I just kind of try to play ratios of the cards that I have. Running 4 of the Diamond Jozu, which is another 2k counter. 1 of the Rush Zoro. Ideally, this should be a 4th Luffy, but same thing. I only have 3 Luffy, so I'm running a 3rd Zoro, and the 3rd Zoro does just fine. Or the 1 Zoro does just fine. I'm running 2 of the Marco, which is just a blocker. 3 of the Atmos. 1 4-drop Luffy. 2 4-drop Frankies. 3 of the 5-drop Luffy. 4 Atmos. Running 3 of the Ace. 4 of the Whitebeard, and 4 Radical Beam. So some notable things in this deck: we're not running Guard Point. The premise of the Strawbeard version is you want to protect life as much as possible, which is why you run so many 2Ks, so that you can play your new gate on 9 or 10 Dawn and still have 2 life at that time. And then from there you just kind of dominate your opponent. It's a really strong list. And so with that, let's get into some gameplay. For the first match, we have a matchup against Zoro. I do have a Nami. My opponent chose to go first. I'm going second. I have Nami and Makino, so I decided to keep. I also have the Luffy, and so I can go a little bit lower to the ground. I play the Nami. My only option is the Radical Beam, so I grab the Radical Beam. And I'm considering playing the Makino. I only have 1 Dawn left. I could save it for a Radical Beam, but it's not as efficient since I still have 6 life. My opponent goes to 3 Dawn next turn, so he could play a Vista, which is why I'm hesitating on playing the Makino. I decide not to play it, and I pass. My opponent's on 3 Dawn. He plays a Curly Dawn, gets a Nami from deck. Plays the Nami, and draws a Radical Beam. Then he passes turn as he can't swing at leader, which is what makes Whitebeard so strong, just having that base 6k. And so every attack, especially against Zoro that doesn't run a lot of counter, most of the time is going to go through. There I swung for 6, my opponent just passes, then I play an Atmos. Pass turn, and I get a Makino out of life. So you can already see I have 4 2k counters. And then I have 2 Radical Beams. My opponent plays a Nami, gets a Jet Pistol, and is possibly going to Jet Pistol the Atmos, as he still has 4 Dawn available. That's what he does. He Jet Pistols the Atmos and passes. But as you can see, just having that 6k base is so strong, because that's 2 turns now where my opponent hasn't been able to swing at my life. I swing for 6 at his life. I have 6 Dawn, so I can play a Luffy and then leave 1 Dawn up. I could put 1 under Luffy and swing for 7, which is what I decide to do. My opponent takes as well, so he's already down to 2 life. I pass and get a Nami out of life. My opponent is now at 7 Dawn with 3 characters. So he could start swinging. He decides to play the Otama on my Luffy. Puts 1 under leader. Swings for 4. I could let it go. I could also try to save it. If I save it, that means that he has to commit more Dawn to try to get rid of it. And it's a pretty scary threat, so he kind of has to get rid of it. So he can either swing with his leader here at the Luffy, or he can attach 1 Dawn and swing at the Luffy. And so that's what he decides to do. Now I can clear his board a little bit, since I have my Nami. I can use my Nami to attack his Nami. Don't have to attach any Dawn. And, well, could have. He plays Vista to get rid of my Nami, and then swings at leader for 6. And here's just a nice, easy 1k counter. I'm counting my Dawn. As I'm at 6, I know that I'm not going to get I can't play I don't have the Whitebeard, but even if I had it, I can't play it next turn. So I don't want to start going down on life too early. And now this is where things can get a little bit scary, as I don't have a board. I don't have the Whitebeard. So I just put 1 under my leader and swing for 7 at life. He plays a Radical Beam. I play the Kingdo, and then I pass with 2 Dawn up, since I have 2 Radical Beams. My opponent has a lot of characters on board, so he can swing for a lot of 6Ks, which is what he decides to do. Puts 2 Dawn under the Dadan, and with the Zoro leader ability, he swings for 6. I counter out of it with the Kingdo. Puts 2 Dawn under the Vista, and then swings for 6 again. Here I use a 2k counter, as I no longer have any 1k counters. Then he swings with his leader at my leader for 6. Same thing, I use a 2k counter. Then he plays a Zoro and swings for 6 again. And same thing, I counter out of it with a 2k. And then plays a chopper blocker. So where it seemed early game I was kind of controlling the game, it's kind of flipped on its head. And now my opponent has a really wide board. And I'm not drawing any of my rush cards. Haven't drawn the 9-drop Whitebeard. And this is where the Strawbeard version kind of struggles a little bit compared to the like the hybrid version or the Moby Dick version. Is if I had a Moby Dick, I could play it, and then all of my characters would get pumped up by 2k, or at least all of my Whitebeard characters would get pumped up by 2k. I swing for 7 at the Zoro to get rid of it. Then I swing for 9 at life. I played my 4-drop Luffy, and I pass with 3 Dawn up for my 3 Radical Beams. I knew he was going to block at some point. I figured he'd want to save the Zoro, but he didn't. So if he had blocked the Kingdo attack, then I would have swung with leader at the Zoro to get rid of it. He jet pistols my Luffy. Then he attaches 4 Dawn under the leader, putting it up to 9k. And swings for 10 at the Kingdo, which I think this is where my opponent makes a mistake and lets me get back into the game. He should have kept swinging with 6s all around at my leader to keep getting cards out of my hand. And now I finally get the 9-drop. So I swing 7 at life. He has a guard point, which he uses to defend his life. I play the 9-drop, and then swing for 8 at lead, since he didn't tap any of his characters. And then I leave 1 up for a Radical Beam. And now my leader's at 8, which makes it a lot harder for me to lose the game. And I don't take a life because of the 9-drop effect. Against Whitebeard, you want to go wide, because every 6k swing that you do gets a card out of hand. Whether that's a 1k, gets a 2k, could get a Radical Beam, or if you run a guard point, could get a guard point. If you go tall against Whitebeard, it makes it a lot easier to defend. And that one simple play allowed me to get back into the game. I mean, it obviously helps that I drew the 9-drop, but I had a 5-drop Luffy that I could have used as well. And then I still had 2 Radical Beams to help defend my life. He puts a lot of Dawn under his leader and then swings for 12 at my Kingdu, which I'm perfectly okay with letting go because my 9-drop is my win condition now. So I have my 9-drop, I have my leader, and I still have the Rush Luffy in my hand. He leaves 3 Dawn up, so I have to take into account different numbers, as he could be running more guard points, it could be Red Hawks. I decided to swing for 10 at life, and if he takes, which he did, I'm just going to put as much Dawn as I can on my leader. I decide to only do 14 in case, I do 15 for the numbers. In case he is able to get out of it, then I still have a Radical Beam to help defend my life and 2 2Ks. And he doesn't, and that's a GG for the first game. Now for the second game, we have a Whitebeard matchup. In the Whitebeard matchup, you always want to go second, as you don't take that early life and you get an extra card. I'm mulligan to just try to get a little bit of a better hand. I'm searching for the 9-drop, which is the most important card in the mirror. I still don't get it, but I at least have I have a Sanji for a turn 2 put for my first turn, and I have an Atmos for my second turn. I decide not to play the Sanji though, as if he has the Vista, then he just KOs the Sanji. And I would prefer to have the 2k counter in hand. Other games I've played, I've played the Sanji, and it just feels really bad if they happen to have the Vista. Now it's my opponent's turn. He's at 3 Dawn. 3 Dawn is a little awkward for Whitebeard. If you run Robins and it's the Strawbeard version, then you can play the Robin. He has a Brook though, so he's able to play the Brook to develop a character and still swing 8. Brook is another option as well. You could play the Brook over the Sanji, you can play it over the promo Luffy. Really just a lot of the red 2K's counters are really good. So you can just kind of play them over some of the other. It's just preference. I decide to counter out of it. As I stated in the Strawbeard version, you kind of want to counter out of as many attacks as you can so that you can remain as healthy as possible for your 9-drop. That my opponent's thinking could have a Nami in hand, could still play a Nami. Decides to leave the 1 Dawn up, could have a guard point then. I just swing 6 as I have the Atmos, and that's what I'm going to play. I do get the 9-drop, which is a massive draw. My opponent uses an Atmos to counter out of it, and then I play my own Atmos and get a Makino out of life. My opponent's at 5 Dawn, so he could swing for 6 with the leader and play the Rush Luffy and swing for 6 as well. He could put 1 Dawn under, swing for 7, maybe play a Marcos. If he has Jet Pistol, he could Jet Pistol my utmost and swing for 7. He does put 1 Dawn under, swings for 7. I'm counting how much Dawn he has, kind of seeing what his options are. I do counter out of it with the Makino. I keep the Sanji over the Makino because late game the Sanji can become an attacker. If you're down on 1 life you can play the Sanji, or you can play the Sanji before, and then just kind of take that last life, and Sanji goes up to 7. And I don't have a Nami to use the Makino to pump up anyway, so the Makino's kind of dead. My opponent then decides to put 4 on the Brook and swings for 7. I only have 5 cards in hand, which are pretty low. So I know I don't have a lot to defend my characters if I start attacking with my characters and then my opponent swings. One thing you also want to keep in mind, I know I have 2 Radical Beams, but they don't really become live until I go down to 2 life. So before that, they're just 2k counters, which just isn't a lot of value. I swing for 6 at life. My opponent has a really healthy hand size. So I just want to get some cards out of his hand. I could attack the Brook. I think in this situation, either option's probably fine. I kind of like that he has to, if he wants to attack with Brook, he has to attach a lot of Dawn to it. But I do decide to attack it after. And so the reason I attacked his life first was just to see if he'd give me some cards first. He lets it go. Then I play my Rush Luffy and swing for 6 at life again. My opponent decides to take, which is really big in the matchup. I then pass turn, leave 1 Dawn up for the Radical Beam, just because even if I have to use it to save my Luffy, and it's just a 2k, I don't have a lot of other cards in hand. I only have an Otama and then a Nami that I can use to counter. But he does go to 7 Dawn, and plays the Ace, so now he can wipe my entire board, which is one thing I definitely need to remember in other matches. Once my opponent goes to 7 Dawn, Ace is just such a good card, such a scary card, because it completely, just the 1 card turns the entire, flips my momentum on its head. My opponent swings with the Ace at my Luffy, 7-3. I don't want to get rid of that many cards to save it, and then swings for with his leader at my Atmos. And then same thing, I just, my cards did what they needed to do. They got some cards out of my opponent's hand, they took a life, and then they served as blockers in a sense, because my opponent swung at them instead of swinging at life. My opponent passes, I get an Otama, I'm at 8 life, or at 8 Dawn, sorry, which is the awkward part sometimes about going second. It's just, it feels like it takes so long for you to get to where you can play your 9 drop. I play the Nami and whiff, which feels terrible in this situation, but there's not much else I can do about it. I have 2 Otamas. I can play the Otamas to get rid of the Ace. Could also play a bunch of Dawn under my leader, which is what I decide to do. I swing for 11 at the Ace. The Ace is only 1k stronger than the leader, so it's not too bad swinging into it. It does make it easier for my opponent to defend, but either way, in this case, he has to give me 3 cards to save it, as he doesn't have any Dawn up, so he can't use any events. And he does decide to save it, so he gives me 2 2k counters and a 1k counter, which is pretty okay. Still not in the best spot, as he has the Ace, he has the leader, And now he plays the Moby Dick. The Moby Dick version in the mirror is better, just because of the extra attack that all of your characters get. The Strawbeard version is better in some other matchups, but in the mirror, the Moby Dick version is better. Because now his leader is automatically 8. His ace is automatically at 9. He still has 7 Dawn up. Could play another ace. Could play a Marco, which would be really bad for me in this situation, as I only have my leader that can swing per turn. He swings for 9 with his ace. I think he should have put 1 Dawn under ace and swung for 10. Because here I can just use 1 Radical Beam to counter out of it. If he put just 1 more Dawn, then I would have to use Radical Beam and something else. He plays a Brook and then gives the 2 of the Dawn to his leader. So now his leader's at 10. Swings for 10. I decide to take, as I don't want to go too low in hand size. And I do get a second Whitebeard. Then he plays a Vista to get rid of my Nami, which Vista now is also at 5k on his turns. I play my 9-drop, and then I just swing for 8 at life. And then leave 1 Dawn up for the other Radical Beam. He uses a Radical Beam. And now he has 3 attackers. I do still have 1 life. So I just have to defend this properly. I have 2 2k counters, a Kingdu and a Nami as counters, and then 1 Radical Beam. But he has, at the moment, my opponent has 3 attacks. So I can take 1, and then I have to counter out of 2 others. This is a scary situation, as if my opponent does his math right, he could win. But I am at 8, or my leader's at 8k instead of 6k, which helps. Because to make the Vista a viable attacker in this case, he has to put at least 3 Dawn under it. And then I can just 1k counter. He swings for 10 with the ace, just puts 1 Dawn under it, swings for 10 to see what I want to do. That guarantees 2 cards out of hand unless I use an event. And then I do just Otama Kingdu to counter out of it. So now he only has 2 attackers. So both of these attacks have to go through. I think my opponent should have put 12. Should have attacked with 12 with the ace. So he just had to put 3 Dawn under it. Swing for 12. And then I have to give him a Radical Beam and another card. He puts 5 Dawn under the Vista and swings for 10. Same thing. It's just easy math. I just Otama and Nami. Or I could take. My opponent still has 4 Dawn up. So then that would bring his leader up to 12 if he decided to attack with everything. And then I would have the Radical Beam and the Otama and the Nami to counter out of it. But if he happened to have if he did that, even if he had a Josie, it wouldn't have mattered at that point. He puts 2 more Dawn under leader, swings for 10. Which is better for me than him having a Marco. Marco would have been up. Would have definitely helped him. But I just decided to take. As after next turn, I'm going to go down to 1 life, or to 0 life either way. And it is a Radical Beam out of life. My opponent still has 2 Dawn up. He has 5 cards in hand. So if he has 2 Radical Beams, that's 8k counter. Then if he has the other 3 or 2ks, that's 6 more. So he's at 14. Which means me just putting 10 under the Whitebeard and swinging should be enough to win. And even if it's not, then I can just swing with my leader, and he should have 0 cards in hand at that point. That's if he has two radical beams and 3 2K counters. I swing for 20,000, and I go ahead and just get rid of the Vista, just in case some crazy shenanigans happen. He manages to survive. If he manages to survive, I lose next turn, as I don't have any Dawn up, and there's nothing I can do. He does have 2 radical beams, has the Otama, but does not have any more 2K counters. And that's it. So that's a GG. Now for the third game, we're playing against Blurple Kaido, which is a defensive and removal heavy deck. My opponent decides to go second. I do get the Nami. So I play the Nami, and then I get a Luffy. And I get another Luffy out of life. So I don't have too much to do on my turn 3, but turn 5 I at least have a Luffy to start going at face. The matches against Smoker or Black and Purple, I think it's where the Strawbeard version is just a little bit better, because you attack a lot more at face, which is what Purple and Black struggle with. Whereas like the Moby Dick version, you play a lot of like high cost characters, which Black and Purple can kind of get rid of a little bit easier. I play a Nami, get a Radical Beam, then I put the 2 Dawn under leader and swing for 8, which my opponent decides to block. Then I pass and I get an ace out of life. My opponent's at 4 Dawn now. Puts 1 under leader to swing. Swings for 6. I don't have a lot of counter. So it sucks that I have to use a 2K here. But I have 3 Radical Beams, so late game I should be okay. He plays another blocker. I just swing for 6 at life. He decides to block. And then I play a Luffy and swing for 6 at life again, which my opponent takes and passes, which could mean that he doesn't have a lot of 2K counters in hand. I get a Sanji out of life. My opponent puts 2 Dawn under and swings for 7 at Luffy, which is a nice easy 2K counter. And then passes with 4 Dawn up. So he could have, since it's Blurple Croc, he could have Love Beams. He could have Hell's Judgment. He could have Thunder Bagua. I put 1 under my Luffy and just swing for 7. It is a Love Beam. Then I swing for 6 with my leader. He gives me 2 1K counters. And then I play my Rush Luffy and then swing for another 6. He plays a Love, draws a card, and I pass, and I hit the 4th Radical Beam. These are the times where Whitebeard is just so scary, where you just one Nami into, Luffy at 5, then I didn't have the ace at the time, but if you had an ace at 7, then the Whitebeard at 9. My opponent puts 6 Dawn under leader and swings for 6 at the Luffy, or for 11K at my 6K Luffy. I just let it go. I'm very okay with that. It served as a blocker, saves my life. He plays a Who's Who and kills my Nami. I swing for 6 at life. My opponent takes. Then I play my Whitebeard and swing for 8 at life. My opponent also takes, and I pass. And my opponent 10 drops, which I kind of forgot about, if I'm being honest. It'd been a while since I'd played purple, but at least I was able to get my opponent down to 1 life before he was able to 10 drop. So that definitely helps. And then I'm still at 2 life with 4 Radical Beams, which just 4 Radical Beams in hand are insane. I definitely feel like Radical Beam needs to be maybe not banned, but limited. Either put down a 2 or 3, because red still has guard point, which is a 1-3. Like it's 3k counter for 1, which is still really strong. But we'll see what happens. I swing with leader, then I swing with the Luffy, put 2 Dawn under it, and swing for 8. My opponent takes, so he's down to 0 life. I leave 3 Dawn up so that I can use my radical beams. Because my opponent has a 10 drop, that's still 12 at 6. So it'd be a radical beam, a 2k counter, and a 1k counter. And then if you put the rest of his Dawn under leader, which he almost did, he swings for 10 at the Luffy. I kind of want to save the Luffy. So like I know now that all he can do is attack for 12 at it. And I have enough to defend against that as well. He has a blocker on board, so I want to save the Luffy so I can swing through the blocker. And I think that's what my opponent recognizes, that the Luffy's the biggest threat. So he goes after it. But luckily enough, I have the counter. I'm considering letting it go, but the better play is probably definitely saving it. And then just next turn, putting 10 Dawn under the Luffy and swinging for 16. Still thinking about it. Looking at my hand to see what else I have. But I decided, yep, saving it is the best play. So I use a radical beam, a 2k counter, a 1k counter to save it. And my opponent disconnects because he knows that there's just nothing else he can do. As next turn, I would just put everything under Luffy, swing through the blocker, and that would have been a GG either way. So now for the 4th and final game, we have a matchup against Law. My opponent decides to go second, so I go first. I do have the Nami, play the Nami, and I get the Luffy and pass, and I get the 9 drop. So you can see with Strawbeards, it's kind of a consistent theme. You want to try to, if possible, the Nami on turn 1, then into finding a Luffy into your 9 drop. My opponent plays a Bonnie and taps it, which is a big mistake. When you play Law, you want to save your Bonnies. You don't want to play your Bonnies early. I swing for 4 here, as if that means if he wants to save the Bonnie, then he has to give me 2 2k counters. And either way, I'll put 1 Dawn under leader, so swing for 7. So he still has to give me 2 cards. And I would rather make it harder for him to save the Bonnie than the life portion of it, because most Laws are going to take that first life anyway. They want those extra resources, so just killing the Bonnie was more important. My opponent plays a Dadan, gets a Nami, then plays a Beige and the Chopper, and swings at my Nami, which is perfectly fine. She did what she needed to do. I swing for 6 at life. As my play is just going to be swings for 6 at life, play the Luffy, swing for 6 at life. My opponent uses a 2k counter. Then I play the Luffy, swing for 6 again. He's thinking could have another 2k in his hand. But he should probably take. Yeah, he decides to take. And I pass. I get a second radical beam out of life. And so now my goal is to protect my life as much as possible until I get to the point where I can 9 drop. He plays the Otama and then plays a an X Drake. I'm not sure if my opponent was thinking that the Luffy was a 4. or if he just needed to have an attacker on board. And then he passes. So he was probably just setting up for next turn, making sure he had 5 characters. Oh, he does mention, oops, mistake. Okay, so he might have misclicked. I'm playing the X straight down. I swing for 6. At life, he decides to block with the chopper. Now, I think what it was is he thought for a second that the Luffy was a 4-drop. Instead of it's a 5-drop. So he probably thought he could KO it. I swing for 6 with my leader as well. He blocks with the Beige. And then I have the ace I could play, but it just doesn't get too much value. I do decide to play it though. I could have played the Kingdu, and swung for 7 as well, and then left 2 up for Radical Beam. That probably would have been the better play. But I decided to put a little bit extra pressure on my opponent, as now he doesn't have any blockers, and attacking for 7 would have made him have to give me some cards out of hand, which Law really doesn't want to do. So it was almost a guaranteed life in that sense. My opponent plays a Beige and plays a Nami. He gets a Jet Pistol. So he's probably going to play the Jet Pistol to KO the Luffy, and then use the leader ability to swap maybe the Nami or the Dadan into something, or the Otama to keep the extra 2k in hand into something else. If he has the 5-drop, he could do the Otama to hand, bounce the Nami, replay the Nami. He decides to put 2 Dawn on the X Drake and swing for 8 at the Luffy, which I just let die. As I know, next turn I'm just gonna play the 9-drop Whitebeard. And Law has a very hard time outing the 9-drop. As every turn it swings at life and it destroys a character on board. My opponent still has 4 Dawn up. He's thinking about what he wants to do. Could bounce the Otama. He could bounce the Otama to play a blocker Law, to bounce the Nami or the Dadan. He could replay the Otama to lower my ace to 5, put 2 Dawn under leader, and swing for 7, so it guarantees 2 cards out of my hand. It all just really depends on what he has in his own hand. He decides to return the X Drake to hand and plays a Beige, as he wanted to keep the big body. I think he should have sent the Nami to hand to keep the attacker. He decides to swing for 7 at my ace. I just use a nice easy 1k counter to save. I swing for 7. As I know my game plan, I'm just going to drop the 9-drop here. He blocks with the Beige. Play the 9-drop and then swing for 8 at life. And my opponent uses an Otama. For the first swing, on my ace swing, my opponent probably should have blocked with Law and then just used 1 2k counter, because this way now he has to get rid of 2 2k counters. And then either way, if I decide to swing at the rested Law, he could have just blocked with one of the 2 Beiges that he had, and it would have saved them a card in hand. So I then pass. My opponent plays a Gordon to reduce my Whitebeard. Then he plays an Otama to reduce it further and Jet Pistols it. So I guess it was smart on my opponent's side to not have played the Otama last turn. And I mean, that makes sense. I didn't know he had a Gordon. I knew he had the jet pistol. I knew he had the Otama, but definitely a good play on his part. Gets rid of my 9-drop. And he still has 4 Dawn to work with. He puts 4 Dawn under leader and swings for 9 at the ace. Which I use a 2k and a 1k to save. He swings at the ace because my leader was at 8 at the time. But I do have the second Whitebeard. I should have swung first with the ace to see what my opponent wanted to do. Doesn't fully matter, but and then if by doing it this way, he knows what I'm gonna do. The other way, he still has to kind of guess. I swing for 8, and then my opponent decides to take. I leave 1 Dawn up for a Radical Beam, and I'm still at 2 life. So in this situation, I don't feel like there's too much my opponent can do. He already used 3 resources, 3 cards last turn to get rid of 1 of the Whitebeards. I know he has an X-Drake in hand. He plays a Nami. Uses the Nami to get a Zoro. And he can't really play defense anymore. He's used a good bit of the 1-drop blockers, but Whitebeard would destroy the 1-drop blockers anyway if he has another blocker law. And this is where Bonnies for him would have been massive. If he would have saved the Bonnie at the beginning of the game and started using them mid-game, I think this game would have maybe been a little bit different. But yeah, my opponent just decides to surrender as he sees that I'm way too far ahead, and there's not much that he can do. So with that, let's get into the final thoughts. In all of the games that I played, it doesn't matter if you, with this version of the deck, it doesn't matter if you go first or second. As you can see, most of my opponents made me go first, because Whitebeard going second is just so strong. But with you having the Nami in this deck, it gives you that play, and then you're still on your 1, 3, 5, 7, 9 curve. So you can play the Nami, then turn 3 if you're playing in the mirror, or most of the time you can just put 3 Dawn under your leader, swing for 9, and almost guarantee a life. Then you have your Luffy, your Ace, your Whitebeard. And so with this deck, gameplay at times can be a little linear, but I will say that I feel like out of the 3 versions, this deck is the one with the lowest ceiling. Just because with the boat version is just having, if you can save an Atmos till end game, if you can a Marco till end, if you can play a Marco mid game and then save it to the end, then it's an automatic 70k attacker, while at the same time it's a lot of defense. And it just makes it harder for your opponents to swing through it. In the boat version, you could also play the 2-drop Blenheim, I believe is the name, blocker, and then that's a 5k attacker or a blocker. And in the hybrid version, where you're playing the Strawhats and the boat, there's just a lot more gas. You have your early game with your Strawhats, and you have your late game with your boat version. So all in all, though, the deck is super strong. I mean, it just, if you want some easy wins, I would say a deck where, I don't want to say you don't have to think too much, but it's definitely a little bit easier to pilot. Like I said, the gameplay can be pretty linear. You know what you're going to do most games. This is definitely the deck. I personally enjoy decks where like they're very either combo heavy or have to think a lot about my plays. So that's why I enjoy Law and Dofi a lot. But there's no taking away that Whitebeard is easily top 3 decks in the format, and it's just super strong. So with that, if you want to make some changes, you can change some of your 2Ks, you can add some Marcos, whatever you feel like. But if you enjoyed the video, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel. But I really appreciate all the support lately. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope that you have a great day.